I am writing this now, still in Miami, with the sounds of ocean waves crashing in the background and palm fronds rustling in the warm evening breeze. It should have been an idyllic family vacation, just a chance to get away from the daily grind, soak in the sun, and make a few cherished memories together. Instead, it has turned into a bizarre soap opera, largely thanks to my sister-in-law, Emily. Let me introduce the cast of characters and explain how this all went from dream vacation to drama central in just a few days. First, a bit about me. I'm 45 years old, and for the past 17 years, I've been married to Taylor, who's now 40. We met in our mid-20s, fell in love slowly over late-night cups of coffee, and shared passions for traveling and good food. Back then, everything felt like an adventure. We've spent the last decade building a stable life for ourselves. Taylor works in marketing, and I co-own a small financial consulting firm. We don't have children, but we do have a house in the suburbs and a rescue dog named Max. Taylor's parents, whom I'll call Frank, 75, and Margaret, 68, are gentle souls. They've been married for nearly 50 years. It's astounding to think about all they've witnessed together. Cultural shifts, technology booms, family gatherings, both joyous and strained. They're the type of people who will chat with a grocery store cashier for so long that they forget other customers are waiting. They mean well, always. They're not wealthy by any stretch. Frank is retired from a small law practice, and Margaret was a school librarian. Between the two of them, they built a modest nest egg, but they rarely splurge on anything elaborate. And then there's Emily, my sister-in-law, who's 36. She is the youngest of the family, always doted on, always considered the baby. Emily and I have never been best friends, but we've coexisted in a polite, if somewhat distant manner. She and Taylor have a complicated relationship, which is steeped in childhood rivalries that I never fully understood. Usually, at family gatherings like Thanksgiving or Christmas, I might notice subtle jabs or see Emily roll her eyes at something Taylor says, but it never seemed malicious enough to cause real strife. When the idea of a Miami vacation came up, I was the one who pitched it. Sunny beaches, great nightlife, historical sites, and a chance for Taylor's parents to get a break from the chilly weather back home. The plan was simple. Taylor and I would handle all the logistics, make it comfortable for her parents, and ensure everyone had the chance to do what they enjoyed, whether that meant relaxing by the pool, strolling along the beach, or exploring local cuisine. Emily's participation was last minute. She initially claimed she couldn't afford the trip and that taking time off from work was too complicated. At the 11th hour, though, she changed her mind, saying she'd love to join the whole family if I still had space in the itinerary. I should have sensed the incoming storm when Emily insisted on upgrading her room to something more luxurious. I shrugged it off at first. Honestly, if it made her happy and it wasn't too big a deal, why not? The vacation was for everyone, and I wanted family unity. But from the moment she arrived at the airport, there was an odd tension in the air. I chalked it up to pre-travel stress or the typical chaos of corralling 5 people onto a plane. That naive hope that everything would work out just fine was shattered almost as soon as we touched down in Miami. We arrived 2 days ago. I still remember stepping off the plane into the warm, humid air of southern Florida. It was early afternoon, and a bright sun lit the runway. Frank was thrilled. He has arthritis in his knees, and the humidity here is often less painful for him than the cold, dry air back home. Margaret smiled at everything, soaking in the palm trees and pastel-colored airport architecture as though she were seeing them for the first time. Taylor was busy making sure her parents were comfortable, helping them with their carry-ons, and offering them water. Meanwhile, Emily was lost in her phone, scrolling through social media, occasionally sighing loudly as if to remind us she was bored. I had arranged for a private car service to take us from the airport to the hotel. It was a splurge, yes, but I wanted everyone to relax after the flight, especially Taylor's parents. Frank seemed intrigued by the luxury SUV waiting for us curbside, while Margaret offered repeated thanks. "Oh, this is just so nice of you," she said, patting my arm. Emily, on the other hand, barely looked up from her phone. She only commented to the driver about how the seats could be adjusted. The drive to the hotel took us along scenic roads, past glimpses of turquoise water and rows of high-rise condos. Miami was buzzing with midday energy. People walking their dogs, joggers in neon outfits weaving through traffic, and colorful murals popping up on random street corners. I tried to point out a few landmarks, like the American Airlines Arena and a famous waterfront park, but Emily was deep in some conversation on social media or texting furiously. Whenever I spoke, I was basically background noise to her. Taylor at least nodded appreciatively, and her parents listened intently to my little tidbits of Miami trivia. After a half hour of cruising through the city, we pulled up in front of of our five-star oceanfront resort. The grandeur of the place struck even me. I'd booked it entirely online, basing my decision on glowing reviews, promising pictures, and the idea that Frank and Margaret deserved something special. The hotel lobby was a sprawling masterpiece of marble floors and tropical plants. A gentle water feature in the center created a soothing, bubbling sound that contrasted with the outside hustle. At the check-in desk, I made sure each room was set correctly, a luxurious suite for Frank and Margaret, and a standard, but still lovely, double for Taylor and me. Emily had insisted on an upgrade, so I had arranged for her to have a slightly more expensive room with an ocean view. Even though it cost more, I figured it would keep any potential complaints at bay. Little did I know how quickly that investment would sour. As we navigated to our rooms, Emily darted ahead, wanting to check out her accommodations first. She even made a little show of snapping a selfie in front of the door plaque that showcased the room category. It was as if she wanted to broadcast to her social media following that she was living the high life in Miami. I found it a bit odd. Usually, you drop your bags, admire the view, maybe flop onto the bed, but Emily's priority was capturing the moment for her digital audience. We all agreed to freshen up and meet in the lobby in an hour for lunch. Taylor and I quickly unpacked, changed into more comfortable clothes, and headed downstairs. Frank and Margaret were already waiting, looking eager for a good meal. We decided on a casual open-air restaurant near the hotel pool where we could enjoy the breeze and watch people lounge by the water. Emily eventually sauntered in, wearing oversized sunglasses and carrying a massive tote bag. It was during lunch that Emily's exclusionary behavior first surfaced in a way I couldn't ignore. She insisted on taking a group selfie, which I naturally assumed included me. But she handed the phone to me and said, "Would you mind taking a quick family pic?" At first, I thought she meant a picture of everyone at the table, so I positioned myself behind them to do a timed shot. But Emily quickly clarified, No, just the four of us, Mom, Dad, Taylor, and me." She punctuated her request with a sweet, almost saccharine grin. I stood there, phone in hand, feeling a pang of hurt. The phrase, "just the four of us," echoed in my head. Taylor noticed, shooting me an apologetic glance, and Frank tried to lighten the mood with a feeble joke about, "How do I work this camera?" But the intent was clear. I apparently wasn't family enough for the photo. I brushed it off outwardly, telling myself that maybe Emily just wanted a keepsake of her childhood family unit. I clicked the photo, fiddled with some angles, and even forced a little smile as I handed the phone back. But inside, a seed of resentment was planted. I told myself not to blow it out of proportion. After all, it was day one. Maybe I was just sensitive from the travel. That same afternoon, we ventured out to see more of Miami. South Beach was our destination, famous for its Art Deco buildings, neon lights, and the wide shoreline bustling with tourists. The energy there was electric. Frank and Margaret were enthralled by the unique architecture, while Taylor and I pointed out quirky shops and interesting street art. Emily stayed near her parents, often linking arms with Margaret in a show of filial devotion that struck me as oddly territorial. When it came time for more photos, because you can't go to South Beach and not take pictures, Emily again ushered me into the role of photographer. She'd say things like, "We want a shot of the original crew," or "Let's recreate our old family photo poses, but updated." It was an intriguing mix of nostalgia and exclusion. Taylor tried to include me whenever she could. "Let's get one with all five of us," she'd say. But Emily was quick to steer the conversation back to "just the four of us." The repeated phrase was beginning to grate on me. At dinner that night, Emily orchestrated the seating so that I was at one end of the table, and she sat between her parents. Taylor sat next to Margaret across from Emily, leaving me somewhat isolated. Perhaps I was reading too much into the arrangement, but it felt deliberate. Whenever I tried to join the conversation, Emily redirected it to some childhood anecdote, like the time she and Taylor built a snowman taller than their mother, or the family camping trips they took when the girls were teenagers. It wasn't that I disliked hearing their stories. It was just the pointed look Emily would give me as she said, "Remember Taylor? Remember Dad? Mom?" And the unspoken subtext, "You wouldn't know about that, would you?" Looking around the restaurant, I tried to focus on the upbeat music, the hum of chatter from other diners, and the warm Florida evening air wafting in through the open windows. Yet I couldn't fully escape the sinking feeling that I was being intentionally shut out. By the time the bill arrived, I felt emotionally drained. Taylor noticed, her eyes meeting mine with a concerned furrow in her brow. But Emily seemed oblivious or unconcerned. She had that smug contentment one might have after a day well spent, completely ignoring the discomfort she was causing. Day 2 brought a trip to the Everglades, a place of immense natural beauty and ecological significance. I had booked an airboat tour, something I was genuinely excited about. Frank, who who's a nature enthusiast, was all smiles talking about how he'd seen documentaries on the region and couldn't wait to see the alligators in person. Margaret wanted to watch the birds. Taylor was excited to see the vast, endless marshland from a speeding airboat. Emily seemed intrigued, but mostly from a let's get good photos for social media perspective. When we arrived, we were greeted by the airboat tour operators, friendly folks with an obvious passion for the ecosystem. They recommended one boat for our group as it comfortably seated 5, but Emily, in her most charming voice, insisted that we split into 2 boats. It's for balance, she explained, and it'll be more comfortable. Taylor gave me a quizzical look because the single boat clearly had room for all of us. I suspected an ulterior motive immediately. Sure enough, she hopped onto the boat with Taylor and her parents, leaving me standing there, awkwardly clutching a life vest, with the second boat operator beckoning me over. My sense of isolation deepened as I watched their boat speed off. Into the wetlands, I sat alone on mine, trying to focus on the experience, spotting wildlife, feeling the wind against my face, enjoying the majestic green expanse. The boat operator was friendly, at least, pointing out hidden gators, rare birds, and explaining the ecological importance of the region. Yet I couldn't fully lose myself in the moment because my mind kept circling back to Emily's choice. After the tours, we reconvened at the docks to share our experiences. Frank was animated, telling me about the alligators they saw close to their boat, while Margaret grinned from ear to ear about the bright pink roseate spoonbills she managed to photograph. Emily acted as if nothing unusual had happened. It was just more comfortable with fewer people on each boat, she proclaimed. Then, in a thinly veiled jab, she added, "Besides, you seem to enjoy your own space." I bit my tongue, not wanting to cause a scene in front of Taylor's parents. But I could tell Taylor felt my discomfort. She approached me later, as we waited for everyone to use the restrooms, and placed a hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry," she said gently. "I think she's just insecure. She always has been when it comes to me." It was a quiet acknowledgement that she saw what was happening. We shared a brief hug, which helped ease the knot in my chest. But the real confrontation was brewing, and we both sensed it. Growing up, I was taught that family is sacred. My own parents, who have long since passed away, instilled in me the belief that you always strive to maintain harmony in family relationships. You help when you can, avoid unnecessary drama, and respect each other. When I married Taylor, I extended that belief to her family. For the most part, it seemed reciprocated, but Emily's actions were testing my convictions. I tried rationalizing her behavior. Perhaps she felt overshadowed by Taylor, who had a stable career and a loving marriage. Maybe she resented the fact that I could afford to pay for these trips and accommodations. Could it be that she felt insecure about her own position in life, leading her to lash out in this way? Or was it simply an ingrained habit from childhood, where it was always her, Taylor, and their parents before I came along? I mulled over these questions late into the night, lying in the plush hotel bed, listening to the ocean outside. Taylor slept beside me, her breathing steady, occasionally shifting under the covers. In the dim light from the street lamps filtering through the curtains, I stared at the ceiling, wondering what to do. Confrontation was not my forte, especially in family matters, but I couldn't continue to feel like a ghost in my own vacation. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me into sleep, though my dreams were unsettled. Scenes of dinner tables where I was the only one without a chair, or cameras that refused to capture my image. On the third day, we headed to Little Havana. If you've never been, imagine a lively stretch of Miami where Cuban culture is vibrant and pulsating. The aroma of fresh coffee and pastelitos wafts through the air, while local musicians fill the streets with the rhythmic sounds of salsa and son cubano. Street murals celebrate Cuban heritage, and small shops offer handcrafted cigars. It's a feast for the senses, and Frank and Margaret were quite excited to explore a culture they'd only read about in travel magazines. We strolled along Calle Ocho, peeking into bakeries and souvenir shops, occasionally stopping to watch older gentlemen playing dominoes outside. The older folks would wave at us amicably, inviting us to admire their game, yet as mesmerizing as the neighborhood was, I felt a growing tension overshadowing the experience. Emily was once again steering conversations in a way that left me out. She'd refer to the good old days of the family's past vacations without me, or talk about private jokes she shared with her parents and Taylor. For the umpteenth time, she angled to take pictures of the family, handing me the camera while she posed with them. Finally, after lunch at a small Cuban cafe where the food was phenomenal, by the way, succulent roast pork, sweet plantains, and strong Cuban coffee that could wake the dead, I couldn't hold back. Emily made yet another comment about how it was just like old times. I interjected, my voice controlled but clearly simmering with frustration. "What exactly exactly do you mean by old times? Because it seems to me those old times are happening on this trip, and I'm not included. Emily looked taken aback. She laughed nervously, perhaps not expecting me to speak up. Oh, don't be so sensitive. It's just nostalgia. You wouldn't understand. These are childhood memories. I locked eyes with her. I'm not asking you to abandon your childhood memories. I'm just asking you to stop actively pushing me out of new ones. The words hung in the humid air, and for a moment, nobody spoke. Taylor opened her mouth to say something, but Emily beat her to it. I'm not pushing you out. You're overreacting. Maybe you should just relax and let us enjoy some family time. She used that same sugary tone she'd deployed at the airport, but now it was dripping with condescension. I took a step back, literally and figuratively. This confrontation wasn't going to be resolved in front of a cafe with Frank and Margaret, looking on, worried, and Taylor wringing her hands. We'll talk later, I said quietly, turning to Taylor, who squeezed my arm gently. Frank looked like he wanted to intervene, but Margaret placed a calming hand on his shoulder. The tension lingered in the air like a distant thunderstorm. That evening, after we returned to the hotel, Taylor and I finally found a moment alone. In our room, I was pacing, restless, trying to process how to approach this escalating situation without ruining the entire trip. Taylor sat on the edge of the bed, brow furrowed, watching me. I don't know what her problem is, I admitted, running a hand through my hair. But it's getting worse, and I'm at my limit. It's like she's actively making sure I'm excluded from everything. Photos, conversations, even seating arrangements. Taylor sighed. I've noticed, she said softly. I just didn't know how to bring it up to you or to her. She's always been the type to cling to mom and dad, especially when she feels threatened or insecure. Insecure about what? I asked, genuinely baffled. She shrugged. Lots of things. She never really found a stable career path. She's always been short on money, and seeing us comfortable, able to afford a trip like this, maybe it makes her feel inferior. I sat down next to Taylor. I can empathize, but it doesn't give her the right to treat me like a second-class citizen. Taylor nodded. You're absolutely right. I think we both need to talk to her. But you should know, she has a tendency to shut down or lash out when confronted. So what do I do? Roll over and take it? My frustration was palpable. I've spent good money on this trip to ensure your parents have an amazing time, and I'm being shoved aside. It's not fair. She squeezed my hand. Let's try to resolve it calmly tomorrow. Maybe I'll start the conversation with her, or we can do it together. I'm sorry you're going through this. Her apology gave me a measure of comfort. I kissed her on the forehead and took a deep breath. Okay, I said. We'll handle it together. The next day, we had plans to explore Little Havana a bit more, then head to some shops in the Brickell area. While Taylor's parents were still getting ready, Emily was sitting in the lobby, scrolling through her phone. Taylor glanced at me and gestured for me to follow her. It was time to address the elephant in the room. We found a quieter corner of the lobby, near some potted palm trees, and approached Emily. She barely looked up. Yes? She asked, sounding distracted. Taylor spoke first. Emily, this trip isn't working for us. We need to talk about how you've been treating my husband. Emily finally lowered her phone, but her defensive posture was immediate. Her eyes narrowed, and her lips pressed together. I don't know what you mean, she said. I took a breath and jumped in. Emily, you've been excluding me from group photos, seating me away from everyone at meals, and making comments that make me feel like an outsider. Yesterday in Little Havana, you suggested I should just let you enjoy family time, as if I'm not part of this family. She gave a short, sharp laugh. Oh, please. You're blowing it out of proportion. I wanted pictures with Mom, Dad, and Taylor because we don't get together like this often. And the seating arrangements are just coincidences. Taylor shook her head. They're not coincidences, Emily. I see what you're doing, and it's not fair to him or to me. For a moment, Emily's defensive facade cracked. Her voice trembled slightly. You don't get it. I always feel overshadowed whenever you two are around. Everyone praises you, how well you're doing, the vacations you can afford, the nice house you have. Meanwhile, I'm, what? The flaky little sister who can barely pay her rent. I softened a bit, realizing this was likely the core of her hostility. Emily, I never intended to overshadow you. I just wanted us to enjoy this trip as a family. Her eyes glistened momentarily with tears, but her pride was still front and center. Well, you have overshadowed me, and it's always been that way. Taylor's the golden child, successful, well off. You, with your money, paying for all these fancy things. It makes me look bad, and it feels like you two are taking my parents away from me. Taylor started to reply, but Emily cut her off. You asked me to come on this trip, but it's obvious you didn't really want me here. You just wanted to show Mom and Dad a good time and maybe rub it in my face that I couldn't afford it on my own. My frustration flared again, but I kept my voice calm. Emily, that's not true. We invited you because we thought you'd enjoy a family vacation, she scoffed. Well, guess what? It's not my idea of fun to feel like a charity case. And clearly you don't like feeling excluded. Now you know how I feel most of of the time. At that point, Taylor's expression softened. She reached out to her sister. Emily, we never meant for you to feel like a charity case. We love you, and we love Mom and Dad. This was supposed to be a nice time. Emily's eyes flickered with conflicting emotions. Anger, hurt, envy, regret, but she simply shrugged. Whatever. I'm done talking about this. She stormed off toward the elevator, leaving Taylor and me to stand there, baffled and tired. I felt no closure, no relief, only a tightening in my chest, a sense that even if I wanted to fix things, Emily wasn't ready to meet me halfway. We pressed on with the vacation. One day, we decided to drive down to Key West. It's a gorgeous route, over the 7-mile bridge with vast stretches of sparkling Atlantic Ocean on either side. I rented a luxury van for the 5 of us, thinking we could chat, sightsee, and enjoy the long drive together. But before I could even set foot in the driver's seat, Emily had rearranged the seating to put me in the back corner. Her justification was people with longer legs should sit up front. Frank and Margaret, ironically, ended up seated in the middle row, while Emily and Taylor took the prime front seats, leaving me in the back by myself. Whether it was truly about leg room or another subtle snub, I wasn't entirely sure. My legs aren't exactly short, and Taylor's parents certainly could have used more leg room at their age, but I didn't protest. By now, I'd adopted a kind of resigned acceptance. The trip to Key West was beautiful. The blue-green water stretching out on all sides was enough to take one's breath away. But in the van, I heard snippets of conversation drifting back to me. Inside jokes, childhood stories. Whenever I tried to interject, Emily would turn the conversation back to something that happened decades ago, a memory I obviously couldn't share in. I looked out the window and tried to focus on the views, promising myself I wouldn't let her ruin my day. Once at Key West, we had lunch at a famous seafood place. The conch fritters were delicious, and the key lime pie was the best I'd ever tasted. Frank and Margaret seemed pleased, taking pictures of the ocean and the iconic southernmost Point Buoy. Emily again insisted on family photos without me, and I obliged, stepping aside to play photographer. But something shifted in me that day. I realized that no matter how hard I tried, no matter how many times I pointed out scenic views, found great restaurants, or made sure everyone was comfortable, I'd never shake Emily's resentment. So I stopped trying. I stopped offering to pay for her meals specifically. I still covered group expenses, stopped inviting her to do things one-on-one, and disengaged from her orchestrations. I focused on Taylor and her parents. I made sure Frank got to see the places he'd always dreamed of visiting, and I helped Margaret find the souvenirs she wanted to take home to her friends at the library. I took photos with them whenever we had the chance, giving them memories of this trip that they could cherish. If Emily wanted to isolate me, so be it. I would create my own joyful experiences with the people who valued my presence. Emily noticed the shift. She tried a few times to rope me back into her dynamic, usually by making snide remarks. Things like, "Oh, you're too busy for us now," or "Don't you want to see the family attractions?" But I remained polite and distant, a technique I learned in my professional life when dealing with difficult clients. Her frustration was evident. On the last night in Miami, we all gathered in the hotel lobby, preparing to go out for one final dinner. Emily, surprisingly, was in a chipper mood. She was wearing a flowy sundress, her hair neatly styled, and she seemed eager to gather everyone around. She made a little speech about how much she appreciated the trip and how nice it was to spend time together. Then she handed me her phone, wearing a wide smile. "Could you take one more photo of just the 4 of us?" she asked, voice dripping with what seemed like practiced sweetness. For a second, I felt my blood pressure rise, but then I remembered the arrangement I'd made earlier in the day, the one that Emily knew nothing about. A wry smile crept onto my face. "Sure," I said, taking her phone. I snapped a photo of Frank, Margaret, Emily, and Taylor all standing together, the backdrop of the hotel's grand lobby behind them. I snapped one more for good measure, then handed the phone back. "Looks great," I said, my tone measured. "Shall we get dinner?" Emily's grin was triumphant, as though she'd gotten the last laugh by once again excluding me from the photographic record. Little did she know I had changed the payment arrangements that morning. Her upgraded luxury suite was no longer on my bill, and if she had listened carefully, she might have noticed I specifically mentioned covering only the rooms I had originally planned. I had arranged with the front desk that Emily's upgrade would be billed separately, directly to her. After all, if she wanted to assert her independence and make me feel like an outsider, the least she could do was pay for her own upgrade. Early the next day, I was in the lobby again, handling the formalities of checkout. Frank and Margaret's suite was fully paid under my name, as was the room for Taylor and me. Emily approached the desk confidently, apparently expecting her charges to be waived or lumped in with mine. fine. The hotel manager looked up her account information and calmly informed her of the outstanding balance for her suite upgrade. Her smile vanished. "There must be a mistake," she said, casting a glance in my direction. "He paid for our rooms." The manager shook his head politely. "According to our records, the upgrade for this suite was moved to a separate payment method yesterday morning. We have your signature on file from check-in, ma'am." Emily turned red. "This is ridiculous. I thought everything was covered." She looked at me with accusation blazing in her eyes. I shrugged. "I covered everything I initially booked," I replied, echoing the words she'd used so many times to exclude me. "Your room upgrade? You insisted on it, so I assumed you'd handle it yourself. Remember?" She floundered for a moment, her mouth opening and closing without forming any coherent words. Taylor looked between us, catching on quickly but not intervening. Frank and Margaret stood off to the side, clearly uncomfortable but not fully grasping the financial arrangement. Emily had to scramble to call her bank, figure out if she even had enough available credit. In the end, Taylor stepped in to help cover part of it, mostly because she couldn't bear to see her sister completely humiliated. Still, the embarrassment on Emily's face was a sight I won't soon forget. She'd spent the entire trip trying to diminish me, making me feel unwelcome, and in the end, she was the one left standing at the front desk with a bill in her hands. I'm typing this at Miami International Airport, waiting for our flight back home. Frank and Margaret are engrossed in a conversation about the souvenirs they bought. Taylor is next to me, leaning against my shoulder, scrolling through her phone, occasionally showing me pictures from the trip. Despite the drama, we did have some truly wonderful moments. Moments I'll treasure, even if they didn't always include Emily. As for Emily, she's been sulking ever since the hotel checkout fiasco. She said very little other than a curt "thanks a lot" that dripped with sarcasm. I'm not proud of how things played out, but part of me believes it was necessary. She needed a wake-up call. Maybe she'll reflect on how her actions contributed to that moment of humiliation at the front desk. Do I regret paying for her upgrade initially? No, because it was a gesture of goodwill. But when that goodwill was abused, I revoked it. Boundaries are essential, and this experience taught me that it's okay to set them, even with family, especially with family. I don't know what the future holds for my relationship with Emily. Family gatherings will likely still be tense at times, but going forward, I refuse to be walked all over. If she wants to mend fences, she'll have to meet me halfway. And maybe, just maybe, this trip will serve as a catalyst for her to confront her insecurities and realize that pushing people away doesn't elevate her standing. It just leaves her standing alone. For now, I'll tuck this story into my mental scrapbook, another chapter in the complex tapestry of family life. As I board the plane home, I'm grateful for my wife, my in-laws, and the sunshine-soaked memories we did manage to create. The photos Emily took may exclude me, but the real memories, those I carry in my heart, are far more inclusive. And as for that unpaid hotel room, well, that's a story Emily will remember for a long time. I certainly won't let her forget it.